this is our final lesson in the class on the 4 levels of motivation, where we talk about the highest level of motivation, which is the level of character.
And if you remember, we talked about character and we talked about God and the way that the way we can define character is really through Him. So when Jesus Christ in the Sermon on the Mount, near the end of the Sermon on the Mount, He says, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as my Father in heaven is perfect," right? That He's telling us we can be motivated by our own character the way God can.
When we talked about that, it sounded to me like you were saying that we couldn't have character motivation that wasn't godly character motivation. And I just want to clarify that. Is that what you're saying, or are you saying that that is the only kind of character motivation we should have?
That's the only kind that we should have, but there's only 2 kinds of character motivation. And that's it. There is godly character motivation and satanic.
Or ungodly.
Or ungodly, however you want to say. Satan, you can follow Satan or you can follow God, and that's the only 2 options. There are no in-between options when it comes to character. When it comes to the other levels of motivation, there's other options, but those are the only 2 options.
So we make a mistake when we think of ourselves as being the arbiter of our personal character as being the arbiter of right and wrong. The idea of my truth, or it's just who I am, that those are ungodly ways to be.
Right. Those are. Because
it's ways of justifying ungodly character by saying that thinking of character as an unchangeable trait that
right.
we just have or we don't have, and whichever way we have it is equally valid to any other way.
Right, and really what we're trying to do with every part of our life is to gradually move through these levels of motivation until we get to character. And then we'll move to the next one and move it to character and gradually.
Yeah, and when we just to clarify what you're saying about that, we aren't going to be operating at any one specific level in every aspect of our life, and we aren't going to be operating at any one specific level all the time.
Right.
For instance, just because I'm at the level of character about some quality, let me say that let me say I'm a kind person. I could say that's a type of person I am. I am a kind person. It means that the majority of the time my behaviors are of a kind character. But it doesn't mean that I won't occasionally behave in an unkind way.
Right, and we're talking about motivation here.
Yeah. Okay.
So
help me with thinking about it as a motivation.
So here's the thing. I might be most of the time motivated by my own character. Like, I'm mostly kind because most of the time I'm being who I am, and I am kind, right?
But maybe sometimes there might be a reward that's immediately present for you, feels really strong, and that you do something unkind and are motivated by a reward.
Right, that's possible, or it's possible that remember. So you have to remember the character is close to me because it is me, right? However, there are times where our character can be disconnected. For example, when you're super overtired, oftentimes you do not act in character. Why? Because your character has become disconnected from you due to the lack of sleep and being overtired.
So when we talk about how lack of sleep has a poor impact on your self-control.
Right.
That's what you're saying.
What we're saying is that the motivation that normally is your strongest motivator, which is your character, has been disconnected, which means that reward might all of a sudden be closer and have a stronger effect on me than my character, because my character has been diminished and weakened due to lack of sleep.
Intoxication works the same way.
Intoxication works the same way.
And when we talk about it being uninhibiting, that's partially what we're saying. We're saying that it disconnects us from our normal character, from
Right.
the things that normally help us to decide what's right and wrong for us to do.
Right. So that's the thing about character. We're not, as a motivator, we're not talking about you are a perfect being like God is. We're talking about I do this because I am. Right. That's what God says when Moses says, "Well, what should I tell them?" You say, "Well, who should I tell them sent me? Tell them I am sent me because He's God." We aren't going to be that in this life ever. But what we can do is we can be motivated by who we are. Now, and that requires us to know who we are. That's one of the big issues, is that a lot of people don't know enough about who they are to be able to develop character as a motivating factor in their lives.
And I think a lot of times people will say to somebody who has a trait they admire, "How do you do that thing?" I have people frequently say to me, "How do you find so much time to read?" Or "How do you read as much as you do?" And sometimes I'll give a variety of answers. I might say, "Well, I get up early and I dedicate time to reading in the morning before my family gets up," or I make sure that I listen to audiobooks while I'm exercising or doing chores. But the real answer is that being a reader is a part of my character.
Yeah, so you are.
I am a lifelong bibliophile, and I have been. You could say it's love when we're talking, because I did say earlier, I love reading, I love nature.
Mm-hmm.
But really, for reading for me is a character trait. And the reason I make room for it in my life is because I don't really know, I don't know another way of being. Like that's just part of who I am.
Well, and think about, here's one of the ways that you can tell the difference between a reading as a love motivator and reading as a character motivator.
Would you agree that reading is part of my character?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Good. I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page about that.
I was actually going to tell you how you know.
Okay, great.
How you know that yours is a character trait and not just a love for reading. And that is because somebody who loves reading reads what they love. Somebody who has a character trait of reading reads both what they love and what they should. And you read both what you love and what you should. And therefore,
that's what my friend calls homework reading. Like you assign yourself homework.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. You assign yourself homework because you read both what you love and what you should. And that's how you know this is not just a love of reading that impels me to read. It's this is who I am. I read because it's who I am.
That's interesting.
And I can.
I was also thinking, you can agree or disagree with this. People often say that people make time for what they love. But I don't find that to be true. I think there's a lot of things that I love and a lot of things that my friends love that get crowded out of their lives by things that are their duties or responsibilities. But I don't think that people let things that are part of their character get crowded out of their life because they can't.
Well,
it's a part of their identity.
The problem is if something gets crowded out, whether it was a character trait at one point or another, it no longer is. And that's the thing that people have to remember. Character traits are not permanent. They are changeable. You can change your character. If you're doing bad things and you want to do good things, you can. Yeah. If you have, if you are doing good things and you want to do bad things, you can. I mean, that's the thing, is that none of this is permanent, not yet. We become permanent when we're resurrected.
But do you agree with that distinction? It's the kind.
Oh yeah.
The things that are making up your character are the things that don't get crowded out for other things.
Well, it's interesting. Because I understand what people are saying, because it's because they don't understand that there's an extra level beyond love. I think, in fact, if I ask people, what's the greatest what's the greatest possible motivator? They will
Usually
say love, especially love for God. Say, well, that's the second best. That's the second greatest motivator. But the greatest motivator is to be like God. Right? That's a better motivator than loving God, is being like God. Now, if you're like God, you're going to love God because there's going to be that sense of belonging that we've talked about. And you're going to feel that love for God.
If it's part of your character to be a hard worker, then you're going to work hard.
Right.
You're not going to have to say, what do I need to do to motivate myself to work hard?
Right. No, you're just gonna work hard, and there's not gonna be any question there, except when you're overtired, then you might say, my character is a hard-working character, and I want to work hard. I'm tired, so now I need to motivate myself. And then you have to find
in addition to tired, we can say ill.
Yes.
And tired is not just, I feel sleepy right now, but it can also be mental overwhelm and fatigue, and anxiety.
Can I just say there are the five dangerous situations that can derail character. These are the five things that generally will derail your character, and you'll have to find other motivators. And that's being bored, not having anything to do. That can really derail your character. Being lonely, that can really derail your character if you're all alone and you have no sense of belonging with anybody or that will totally derail. Access to things that can distract from your character. That happens a lot. Video games frequently can do that to people where maybe they are a hard worker, but then they get caught up in a video game and they just can't seem to let go of it.
So when you think of access, that's the A in your blast.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could almost replace it with addiction, although they're both things. But the access is mostly the things that you feel tempted to over participate in.
Right.
And that's usually a feeling we associate with the idea of being addicted, that I feel compelled to do this activity or use this substance or whatever, especially to an excessive amount, and I can't regulate it.
Right. And then the other two are the ones we've already talked about, which are being sick. Being sick can really take away from your character motivation, and then being tired. And so that's blast. And those are the five things and when those happen. I
just want to add to tired that it's more, I already said this, but just to clarify, it's more than just physical fatigue. It is also emotional fatigue that we often experience as depression or anxiety.
Yes, exactly. And those can really mess with our character motivation. Now remember, this is something that's really important to remember. We're not talking about your motivation. I guess what am I trying to say? Your character, right? You might not pray on a regular basis. That doesn't mean that your character is, I'm a person who doesn't pray. That just means that's your habits. You don't have the habit of praying. Your character has more to do with what you know you should be doing. And your character motivation is, if I know I should be doing it and I'm trying to do it, right? That's the thing is so I want people to know that your character is not what you are doing. Right? That's
it's more like your sense of duty.
Yeah.
It's the things that and that's a really kind of old-fashioned word to us now. But when we're talking about motivation, I feel like it's really applicable.
Mm-hmm.
You could say we're motivated by things we want to do, things that anyway, and one of the motivations is the feeling that I should or I ought to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is a motivator to you, that is your sense of duty. It's not a sense of what I will get out of it or what I will avoid, whether I get it from a person through love or whether I get it through a reward. It's the sense that I'm doing it because it ought to be done. And your own personal sense of ought are those character traits that you've developed.
Exactly. And that is the character motivation. And that's why what we want to get to, the point where our behaviors, our actions are in line with our character.
What's interesting about that is that people don't think of dutiful behavior as being the highest or most moral. I think we tend to think of it lower, like, oh, you're just doing that out of duty. You're just doing that because of your sense of honor.
Right.
And we, as contemporary citizens of the world, we really downplay honor and duty and responsibility.
But, isn't interesting though, because you think about God. Why does God do what he does? Why is God righteousness? Why is he truth? Why is he these things? He is those things because he fulfills his duty perfectly, and because that's who he is. Right? That's the highest level. He doesn't do it because he loves somebody, although he does love people. He loves us, and because he loves us, he wants us to have that same sense of belonging that he has. But he does it because he's God, and that's the highest level. When we do things.
So what you could say that because the scriptures say, "For God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son." It sounds like he's motivated by love. But you could also imagine if there was no world, if there was no human creation, God would still be God, and he would still be perfectly righteous.
And he would still do
everything. And he would do those things not... So that's how you can say that his primary motivation is his character rather than his primary motivation being love. Because if you took the objects of love away, he does not cease to be God or cease to continue to do godly things.
And yet, because he's acting out of character, yes, he did send his Son to the world because he loved.
When you say out of character, it sounds like you mean not within character.
Because he's acting within his character, which is righteousness. Then yes, he sent his Son because he loves his children. Because, like we talked about, the character includes all of the lower levels of lower levels of motivation. So you can always say, God did it because he loved us. God did it because he wanted the reward of having his children come back to live with him again. God did it so that he wouldn't lose any more of his children than he absolutely had to, right? You could say at any one of those levels of motivation, you could say that God did it for that reason, and you would be telling the truth. Because character includes all four levels of motivation.
How do we use this character to motivate others that we have a responsibility to motivate?
We don't, and we can't. We don't, and we can't. There is no possible way. Even God won't.
It's actually why most character training programs are so ineffective, and why moralistic books and movies with agendas and all kinds of things are so ineffective. They're all trying to jump over things and think, oh, we can teach, we can give you character.
Yeah, and
we cannot, and we should not.
No, we can't, and we shouldn't. Now, what we can do is we can teach people how to build their own character, but we cannot build their character. We cannot motivate them by character. You cannot say to somebody, you should do this because this is who you are. It will never work. Will never work. But what you can say is, based on your own understanding, what do you think should happen?
Can you help somebody identify, or help yourself identify the character traits that someone else has that help you interact with them in a positive way?
What you can do is you can identify the character traits that you feel like they have, and maybe they do, maybe they don't. Just because they act one way does not mean they have those character traits. And I think Jane Austen is really good at illustrating this, that in some of her villainous characters, that they act wonderfully. They have these beautiful and wonderful behaviors outwardly.
It's like Elizabeth Bennet says about Mr. Wickham in Pride and Prejudice, that he has all the appearance of goodness.
Yeah. So you can't go by what.
And she doesn't mean just like that he has an attractive face. She means that the way, everything about the way he behaves
comports himself
implies a good character.
Right. So that's the thing, is you can't do, but what you can do, and what you should do, is you should be complimenting people and telling them, I think that you're this kind of a person. And then even if they don't know, even if they don't believe that of themselves, oftentimes they feel like, I'm so glad that you feel like I'm that kind of a person, even though I'm not. I'm glad you think I am. And that's the best way to help them, because you're identifying the traits that you value. And if you're somebody that they love and respect, then they're going to try to cultivate the traits that you value.
I think it's also important for us to not over-identify or to label character traits that we see as negative in others,
right.
Especially in our children or spouses.
Yes.
If we say
to
our children things like, you're so lazy, why don't you ever finish your chores? You're reinforcing the character trait that you don't want them to have.
For one thing, you should never call names.
Yeah.
Never ever call your children or your spouse or anybody else names. Names should not be a part of what you're doing.
Yes,
with
Seth.
People.
Name. Yeah. No, we know what you mean. I know. We all know what you mean. We're talking about name calling.
But yes, I agree. You want to identify through compliments the traits that you value, and you never want to reinforce negative traits by telling people they have them. You want to eliminate negative traits by not bringing them up in conjunction with a person. Now, you might teach about a negative trait in a lesson or something where you're saying, hey, this is a way that we as a group don't behave. But you should never say to a child or to a colleague or an employee, you are lazy, or you are, whatever.
When I was growing up, I was really identified by the people around me as being overly talkative, by my parents, by teachers, by other people. And I was frequently told that I talked too much. And the effect that it had on me did not actually make me talk less, but it did make me feel self-conscious and feel negative towards myself about the fact that I talked, which meant that when I was in conversations and I was talking, I didn't, you would think maybe, it would make me conscious, so I would try to talk less in conversation, but especially as a child and a young person, I didn't have that much control yet. But it did make me feel a lot of shame and guilt about the amount of talking that I did. And it made me identify myself in a negative way with something that really could have been a strength. It could have been a strength that I was developing to speak well. And instead I feel like I was I was inhibited in that. And all of the people who were drawing my attention to it were very well-meaning. They all thought that if they drew my attention to a fault, it would improve. And that is just not how actually we improve our faults. We don't improve our faults by having our attention drawn to them.
No, and it's interesting because I think one of a better way to have handled that might have been to say something like, you know, oh, I really admire your Uncle Lane. You know, he doesn't talk a lot, but when he does say things, everybody listens. And you wouldn't say anything about you. Oh, you talk too much. It would just be, wow, I really admire Uncle Lane and the way he communicates. And he really doesn't talk much, but when he does, everybody listens. Right? And then...
Or maybe, hey, at that family gathering we were just at, did you notice how your cousin just really made everyone feel listened to? I just really enjoy having them around because they really make me feel heard.
Yeah. So identifying, again, it goes back to what we were talking about with love and respect, right? Because remember, you cannot use motivation or character to motivate anybody else. But what you can do is help them to build the lower levels of motivation so that they can move into the character level. And so by helping them identify people who have the character traits that you value, helps them to want to develop those traits.
Yeah. Now, I also think that great literature functions this way, but you have to be really careful about it. Because I hear people all the time say, oh, my child has problems with telling the truth. Give me a book that will teach them to tell the truth. And that's not what I'm talking about. There's no book that's going to teach your child to tell the truth. But over time, exposure to great literature gives you experiences with a wide variety of positive character traits and negative character traits. And you learn to make those positive things a part of yourself. But you can't do it by the book trying to teach you the lesson. Mm-hmm. And you can't target people with books. Like, if I give you this book, if I give you Anna Karenina, then you will learn to not be an adulterer.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. What's interesting about that, I'll tell you a quick story about a client that I worked with, a young man who was in trouble for some sexual misconduct, and so he had to take some polygraph tests, and he had to talk about all the things that he had done so they could identify all the people who had been hurt. And he kept failing his polygraph tests. And so they kept saying, well, there's something that we're missing. There's something that we're missing. And they brought him to me, and they wanted me to work with him and see if I could.
So you started working with him at the point where he was already failing these polygraphs.
Right. He'd failed 7 polygraphs when he came to me.
Okay.
And what we did is we read together. So we read Farmer Boy, we read, I can't remember. We read about 4 or 5 books. And what we did was in each book, we did a timeline where we just took the main character and we just did a timeline. Okay, what happened at this time of this person's life? What happened at this time? And we just went right through and did a timeline. And then we read the next book and we do a timeline.
So you didn't pass judgment on the character. You just identified... You were doing a form of narration.
Yeah.
You were saying what happened in this book.
Yeah, we were just narrating. And then, after the 4 books, we did his timeline.
What happened?
And I said, what happened in your life? Let's do your timeline. We went through and we identified 3 other people that he had abused, had hurt. And his social worker was shocked and surprised. And she was like, how did you do that? And he went and took a polygraph test and passed it. And when they asked him, have you told us everything that you've done? Yes. Perfectly passed the polygraph test. And she was super surprised. She said, what did you do? And I told her what I had done. And she said, oh, so you had him read books that about boys that lied. And I said, no, in Farmer Boy, I don't think that
There's no
I
lie.
don't think he ever lies in that book. And I said, in the other books, it wasn't. I said, no, we just read books together and did timelines. And then when it was time to do his timeline, because we were not, like you said, we were not judgmental about anybody's timeline, about what was happening. We just did a timeline. So when we did his timeline, it was a safe place for him to be able to do a timeline and give all that information. And so it was really interesting how literature can really help us create within ourselves these character traits.
We're going to have to do a class later on how to enter into literature and be changed by it, but not to use it as anyway. Yeah.
As a change mechanism. We
Yeah.
don't want to use literature as a change mechanism,
But that
we want
is a
literature
whole
to-
class, because that's a super important. It's super important to me, and it's a really important part of your work. How
It is.
how literature functions within your life
Yes.
coaching.
So
We are actually
over time,
To
but I
the-
just want to say one more real quick thing, and that is
Okay.
we're talking about how you cannot use character as a motivation for somebody else. They can only use that for within. However, you can help people learn how to build character. In our next class, we're going to talk about positive parenting, and it is a tool specifically built to help teach somebody how to build character.
This class is the foundation for several upcoming classes, and the next one, like Seth just said, will be the positive parenting class. You won't have to take the positive parenting class to do some of the other ones, but this class really is a foundation for a lot of the other action-based classes that we will be doing. So this class has been mostly, if you feel like I didn't learn that many things to do, don't worry, because this is a class that's mostly to make you aware of how motivation functions so that you'll be prepared to take action in other specific areas like parenting.
And your finally, your assignment for this week is what I'd really like you to do is go and find last week you identified, or last class you identified several people that you loved and respected and honored. What I want you to do this week is I want you to identify at least one positive character trait that each of those people have that you would like to emulate, that you would like to try to do yourself.
All right. Thanks for participating in this class. We hope that it's been beneficial to you, and we hope to see you in a further class.